The dining room that evening was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint clink of silverware against china. At the head of the table sat Evelyn Carter, 80 years old, her silver hair tied neatly, her back straight despite the years that weighed on her shoulders. The table was filled with her children and grandchildren, laughter and chatter bouncing off the walls of her North Carolina farmhouse. But the warmth didn't reach Evelyn. Her eldest son cleared his throat, his voice cold and sharp as a knife. "Mom," he said, sliding a stack of papers toward her, "you're too old to handle these things now. From here on, we'll take over your accounts and the farm." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Her daughter, sitting just across, smirked as she added, "Just rest, Mom, you're fragile now. Let us take care of the real business." Evelyn's hand hovered over the papers, the candlelight flickering against her lined skin. Around the table, no one objected. The grandchildren whispered. The younger relatives exchanged glances. It was as though everyone had already decided she was nothing more than a relic, a fragile piece of history to be set aside. But Evelyn didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, a soft smile curved her lips. And behind that smile, her eyes gleamed, sharp, alive, burning with the fire that had carried her through decades of battles. "They think 80 means weak," she thought, her gaze sweeping over the children she had raised with her own 2 hands. "But they've forgotten who taught them to fight in the first place." And in that silence, in that single flicker of her eyes, the audience of life's drama would know this was no ordinary grandmother. This was a storm waiting to break. The papers from dinner were only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn noticed small changes in her own house. Her son took phone calls in hushed tones on the porch. Her daughter carried folders she never explained. Bank statements stopped arriving in the mailbox. Even the farmhands, who had always looked to Evelyn for direction, began asking her children instead. It was as if the ground beneath her feet was shifting, slowly, deliberately, and she was being pushed out of the life she had built. One evening, as the cicadas hummed outside, Evelyn walked past the study door and froze. Her son's voice, low but sharp, carried through the crack. "Once she signs, it's all ours. Accounts, the farm, everything, she won't fight back. At her age, she can barely stand." Laughter followed. Her daughter's voice chimed in, dripping with false pity. "By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. She'll just fade into the background. That's what old people do." Evelyn pressed her hand against the wall, her chest tight, the words cutting deeper than any wound she'd ever known. These were her children, the same children she had carried, fed, fought for, sacrificed everything to protect. For a moment, the pain threatened to crush her. 80 years, and this was what she had come to, being erased from her own story. But then she straightened. A memory sparked in her mind, not of weakness, but of battles survived. The foreclosure notice she had torn apart 30 years ago. The night she had worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. The day she had stood in front of the farm gates, refusing to let a conman steal her land. No, she would not be erased. Not now, not by the very children she had taught to fight. She stepped back from the study door, silent as the shadows. Her heart no longer broke, it hardened. "You think I'm too old to stand," she thought, her eyes fierce. "You've forgotten who taught you to walk." And in that moment, Evelyn Carter, 80 years old, frail in body but iron in spirit, made a decision. She would fight, not with shouting, not with begging, but with something her children would never see coming. That night, Evelyn sat alone on the porch, the North Carolina moon casting silver light across the fields. Her children thought she was fragile. They thought age had stolen her strength. But as she rocked gently in her chair, memories rose like ghosts, memories of battles they would never understand. She was only 34 when her husband died. One rainy morning, a knock on the door delivered the news, an accident on the road, a life cut short. And just like that, Evelyn was left a widow with 3 hungry children clinging to her dress. There was no time for grief. Bills still came. The land still needed tending. So she tied her hair back, pulled on her late husband's boots, and stepped into the mud. Days blurred into nights. Evelyn worked 2 jobs, cashier by day, seamstress by night, and when her hands ached too much to sew, she wrapped them in rags and kept stitching anyway. She remembered the winters when food ran thin. She would sit at the kitchen table, pushing the last slice of cornbread toward her children, pretending she wasn't hungry. She remembered the foreclosure notice nailed to the gate, bold black letters threatening to take the farm. Evelyn tore it down, marched to the bank, and demanded an extension. They laughed at her then, too. But she fought. She worked. She paid every cent. And then there was the land dispute. A slick-tongued man in a suit once tried to trick her into selling a piece of the farm for pennies. Evelyn had stood in front of the property line, arms crossed, refusing to sign. Her voice, steady as stone, had cut through his lies. "This land isn't just dirt, it's blood, it's sacrifice, it's mine." He left empty-handed, and the farm remained hers. The memories faded, and Evelyn's eyes returned to the present. Her hands, though wrinkled now, still bore the calluses of those years. Her body carried the proof of every war she had already survived. Her children saw weakness, but what they didn't see was the steel beneath her skin, forged in decades of fire. She whispered into the night air, her voice low but unbreakable. "I didn't just survive life, I built it, and if I fought then, I'll fight now." The farmhouse was quiet, but Evelyn's mind was alive, sharp, calculating, relentless. She had been erased from her own dinner table, whispered about in her own home. But Evelyn Carter had not survived 80 years just to surrender now. The very next morning, she drove her old pickup down a country road, dust rising behind her wheels. She stopped at a modest brick building at the edge of town, the office of Harold Green, the family's longtime lawyer. When Evelyn walked in, Harold looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. "Evelyn, it's been years. What brings you here?" She sat down, back straight, eyes steady. "My children think I'm too old to fight," she said. "I need to remind them who taught them how." Together, they drew up new papers, a fresh power of attorney stripping her children of the control they thought they had. Medical documents from her doctor declaring her mind sharp and capable. And finally, a brand new will, transferring the farm and her accounts not to the ungrateful children, but to her eldest granddaughter, Clara, the only one who had always treated her with respect. Harold tapped the papers into a neat stack. "With this, Evelyn, you'll be untouchable." Evelyn gave a rare smile. "Good, let's keep it that way until I'm ready." But that wasn't all. Evelyn had learned long ago, words can vanish, but recordings do not. That evening, when her children gathered in the study again, scheming in low voices, Evelyn stood just outside the door. This time, she carried a small recorder in the pocket of her apron. "She won't fight back," her son's voice echoed. "At her age, she can barely think straight." Click, the recorder captured every word. Each cruel sentence became another weapon in her growing arsenal. Later that night, Evelyn placed the recorder beside her Bible on the nightstand. Her wrinkled hand rested on the cover for a long moment. "Lord," she whispered softly, "you've given me strength all my life. Now give me patience until the moment is right." Her children thought she was too old, too fragile, too defeated. But what they didn't know was that Evelyn Carter was already building her counterattack, one quiet, unstoppable piece at a time. The family gathered again on a Saturday afternoon. The long oak table was set with papers, pens, and the kind of forced smiles that hide sharpened intentions. Evelyn sat at the head, her frame small against the tall-backed chair, but her presence steady, unshaken. Her eldest son slid a folder across the table. "Mom," he said firmly, "it's time. These papers transfer the accounts and the farm. Just sign and we'll take care of everything for you." Her daughter leaned in, her voice syrupy but smug. "It's for your own good. You can rest and we'll handle the hard part. You've done enough." Evelyn looked down at the stack of papers. Around the table, her children leaned forward, pens ready, eyes gleaming with anticipation. She let the silence hang for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled. "Funny," she said softly, her voice cutting through the room like glass, "because I have papers too." Her hand slipped into the pocket of her cardigan. She pulled out a small flash drive and a folded set of documents, placing them gently on the table. "And I have recordings. Want to hear yourselves calling me weak?" Her son's face drained of color. Her daughter's mouth fell open. Evelyn tapped the flash drive once with her finger. "Every word, every whisper you thought I couldn't hear, all saved." The room froze, even the air seemed to stop moving. Then she unfolded the second set of papers, her new will. She slid it across the table, her granddaughter Clara's name glowing on the page like a torch. "You wanted me erased, but I erased you instead." The shock rippled around the table like an earthquake. The grandchildren stared wide-eyed. The younger relatives whispered in disbelief. Her son stammered, "Mom, what did you do?" Evelyn's voice never wavered. "I did what I've always done. I protected this family, even from its own." No one spoke. The papers they had pushed in front of her suddenly looked meaningless, flimsy, compared to the ironclad evidence she had just dropped like a hammer. And for the first time in weeks, Evelyn Carter was not the frail grandmother in their eyes. She was the matriarch, the fighter, the storm they had underestimated. The silence at the table was suffocating. Papers lay scattered, the children's folder pushed aside, Evelyn's new will and the flash drive gleaming in the chandelier's light. Finally, her eldest son's chair screeched back. He shot to his feet, face red with fury. "Mom, how could you do this? How could you betray us like this?" His sister slammed her hand on the table, voice trembling with rage. "We're your children. How dare you give everything to Clara after all we've done?" Evelyn rose slowly from her seat. The room hushed, every eye turning to her frail frame as she stood tall, her hand resting lightly on the chair for balance. Her voice, though soft, cut through the chaos like a blade. "Betray you," she said, her eyes burning. "I didn't betray you. I raised you. I sacrificed for you. I taught you how to fight. And you." She looked at each of them in turn, her gaze steady, unflinching. "You just forgot who taught you." The words struck harder than any shout. Her son's mouth opened, then closed. Her daughter's fury drained into silence. The grandchildren shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her eyes. Evelyn leaned forward, her palms pressing flat against the oak table. "I may be 80, but 80 is not fragile. 80 is not finished. 80 is undefeated." The chandelier light caught her silver hair, her figure casting a shadow longer, stronger than her years. No one dared speak. Her voice had turned the entire room into a courtroom, and she was judge, jury, and witness all at once. Her children, who had laughed at her weakness, now sat in stunned silence, shrunken by the weight of her truth. Word spread fast. In a town like theirs, nothing stayed hidden for long. The whispers reached church pews, neighbors' porches, and the feed store down the road. Evelyn Carter's own children tried to take her farm, and she beat them at their own game. The legal papers were ironclad. Harold Green, her lawyer, confirmed it before the county clerk himself. The farm, the accounts, the legacy, all remained under Evelyn's name. The recordings left no room for argument. Every word her children had whispered in greed now echoed as evidence against them. At the farmhouse, the atmosphere shifted. The same children who had once spoken with smug certainty now avoided her eyes. Their voices, once sharp with arrogance, were reduced to bitter silence. Her eldest son finally muttered, "We didn't think you'd fight back." Evelyn's gaze was steady. "That was your first mistake." In the community, the shame cut deep. Neighbors who had admired her children turned away. At church, no one praised them anymore. Instead, they praised Evelyn, the matriarch who had survived, who had defended her land even from her own blood. And through it all, one person remained by her side, Clara. Her eldest granddaughter wrapped her arms around Evelyn one evening, whispering, Grandma, I'll carry this legacy with respect. I promise. Evelyn's weathered hand cupped her cheek. That's all I ever wanted. Not blind obedience, but respect. There was no gloating, no triumph shouted from the rooftops. Evelyn did not need victory parades. Her justice was quiet like her strength. She simply stood taller, silver hair catching the light, dignity restored. And as her children sat in their own silence, Evelyn spoke one final truth. I may be 80, but 80 is not helpless. 80 is undefeated. The dawn broke gently over the rolling fields of North Carolina. Golden light spilled across the pasture, painting the rows of crops in shades of green and gold. The air was cool, fresh, and full of promise. On the porch of the farmhouse, Evelyn Carter stood tall, one hand resting on the carved wooden cane that had become her companion. At 80, her body bore the years, but her spirit stood unbroken. Beside her was Clara, her granddaughter, eyes bright as she looked out over the land. The two stood together in silence, generations woven into one moment. Evelyn reached down, her wrinkled hand covering Clara's. One day, she said softly, her voice steady as the rising sun, this land will be yours, not because it was given, but because it was respected. Clara squeezed her hand, nodding with quiet determination. In Evelyn's lap rested the family Bible, worn from decades of prayer. Between its pages was tucked the will, the proof, the legacy she had fought to protect. Her eyes swept the horizon, fields she had bled for, nights she had worked through, dreams she had nearly lost but never surrendered. And as the first rays of sunlight kissed her silver hair, Evelyn Carter whispered to herself, they thought I wouldn't fight back at 80, but they forgot I raised fighters, and fighters never quit.